It was October of 1974. The last letter had come in the spring. Nothing since. I'd been on the Zodiac thing 6 years. 6 years of letters and ciphers and a symbol I still didn't fully understand. The folder on my desk wasn't a folder anymore. It was a stack, 3 feet high, police reports, newspaper clippings, photostats of his handwriting, cipher transcriptions in a half-dozen alphabets. I needed something off the top of the stack. I wasn't going to get it on my own. The girl at the front desk pulled it down without being asked and set it next to the lamp. She walked back out. 6 years, and I had no name. Here's what I knew. Between December of 1968 and October of 1969, somebody in Northern California killed 5 people. 2 teenagers parked at a turnout, a waitress and her date in a parking lot, a college girl on a small island in Lake Berryessa, a taxi driver in San Francisco. Different weapons, different methods, different settings, same man. He told us so himself. Starting in August of '69, he wrote letters, sent them to the newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Examiner, the Vallejo Times. He wrote in tight, slanted block capitals, signed every letter with a circle crossed by a line, a symbol that looked like the crosshairs of a rifle scope, and called himself the Zodiac. The letters had ciphers in them, codes. He wanted them on the front page. He said if they weren't, he'd kill more people. The papers printed them. The killing stopped anyway, after the cab driver. But the letters kept coming. For years, taunting, bragging, counting. He claimed 37, confirmed 5. That's what everybody knew. What was bothering me was what everybody didn't. 3 things since the beginning. The symbol on the bib, the circle and the cross. He'd painted it on a costume he wore at one of the murders, and on every letter, and on the door of a victim's car. Nobody had ever explained it. It was supposed to mean something. He wanted us to know it meant something. The cipher we couldn't crack. He'd sent 4. We'd solved 2. One of them, 340 characters mailed in November of '69, had defeated everyone. The FBI, the Navy, cryptographers at universities. 5 years of work and nothing. And the confidence. Letter after letter, year after year, the writing of a man who was not afraid of being caught. A man who knew he wouldn't be. The girl at the front desk set a folder on the desk. Newspaper clippings, fresh, a column from the Chronicle. The case had gone quiet, and the writers had started writing about why. She walked back out. I picked up the pacifier. I bit down on it and looked at the stack. 6 years of work and no name. I didn't think there'd be one. Not now, not soon. But I wanted to walk it through one more time. From the beginning. December 20th, 1968. A Friday, 2 days before Christmas. Lake Human Road, just outside the small town of Benicia, California. A 2-lane stretch of dark asphalt that ran past a water pumping station and a sheep ranch. There was a gravel turnout on the side of the road. Local kids parked there. Lover's Lane. Everybody knew. That night, a 17-year-old boy named David Faraday picked up a 16-year-old girl named Betty Lou Jensen for their first real date. First date. He'd promised her parents he'd have her home by 11. They went to a friend's house, then to a restaurant. Then, sometime after 10, they drove out to the turnout. Faraday parked his mother's Rambler station wagon facing east on the gravel. Around 11 p.m., a passing motorist spotted the car. Nothing unusual. 5 minutes later, somebody stopped the car next to it. The killer parked roughly 10 feet away on the passenger side. Got out, walked over. He shot Betty Lou Jensen 5 times in the back as she ran. He shot David Faraday once in the head. He left the bodies on the gravel, and was gone. At a few minutes after 11, a woman driving along Lake Herman Road named Stella Borges saw two shapes in the turnout and pulled over. She found Jensen dead at the scene. Faraday was breathing. He died at the hospital. I looked at the police report. 6 minutes between the time the couple was last spotted alive and the time their bodies were found. 6 minutes, in a turnout off a back road 2 days before Christmas. I worked the pacifier between my teeth and read it again. There were no witnesses. There were no useful tire tracks. There was no motive anyone could find. The kids had no enemies. They weren't robbed. Faraday's wallet was in his pocket. Jensen's purse was in the car. The Solano County Sheriff's Office called it the act of a madman. They worked it for months. Nobody emerged. By summer, hope of solving it was fading. In August of '69, the killer wrote a letter and explained that the children at the turnout had been the first. By then, he'd already done it again. July 4th, 1969. 6.5 months later. A waitress named Darlene Ferrin, 22 years old, mother of a young child, drove her Corvair to a parking lot at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, 4 miles from Lake Herman Road. With her was a young man named Mike Mageau, 19. They were on a date. They sat in the car. The lot was empty. It was dark. Around midnight, another car pulled into the lot and parked behind them. The driver got out. He walked toward Ferrin's Corvair with a flashlight. Mageau thought for a second that it was a cop. Then the man started shooting. He emptied a 9mm at the car. Mageau took rounds in the neck, face, and leg. Ferrin took multiple rounds in the side and the chest. The killer turned. He walked back to his car. He started to drive away. Mageau, conscious, started screaming. The killer stopped, backed up, walked back, shot them both 2 more times, then left for real. Mageau survived. Ferrin didn't. 40 minutes later, a man called the Vallejo Police Department from a payphone 3 blocks away. He said, "I want to report a double murder." He gave the location. He said, "I also killed those kids last year." The dispatcher who took the call was a young woman named Nancy Slover. She kept him talking. She tried to keep him on the line. He wasn't rattled. He spoke in a measured, deliberate voice. At the end of the call, he said, slowly, "Goodbye." Then he hung up. The phone he'd used was 3 blocks from the police station and around the corner from Darlene Ferrin's house. The first murder was a man who killed 2 strangers in a turnout and disappeared. The second was a man who killed a stranger, called the police 40 minutes later, told them he'd done it, told them he'd done the first one too, and then went home. That was a different kind of killer, one who wanted us to know. On August 1st, 1969, 3 Bay Area newspapers received the same letter. Identical, hand-printed in tight block capitals. The Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Examiner. Each letter began the same way. "I am the killer of the 2 teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman, and the girl on the 4th of July. Each letter contained details only the killer could have known. The position of the bodies, the brand of ammunition, the number of shots, and each letter contained 1/3 of a cipher. A cryptogram, written in a mixed alphabet. Letters, Greek, astrological signs, made-up shapes. Together, the 3 pieces formed 408 characters. The killer wanted them printed on the front page. If they weren't printed by Friday, August 1st, he wrote, he would kill a dozen more people that weekend. The papers printed them. Within a week, a high school history teacher in Salinas named Donald Harden working with his wife Betty at their kitchen table, broke the cipher. They figured he was an arrogant man. So they tried I as the first letter, and like killing, and they were right. The decoded text began, "I like killing people because it is so much fun." It went on for 400 more characters. It was rambling, full of misspellings, full of the same word repeated 3 times. Paradise, paradise, paradise. He believed that everyone he killed would become his slave in the afterlife. He believed, with apparent certainty, that he would not be caught. It did not contain his name. I read it the first time on a Friday afternoon. I read it 3 more times before I put it down. I chewed the pacifier the whole way through. Most criminals are not interesting. Most criminals are men who do things on impulse and then run. Most criminals are caught because they leave fingerprints, or because they tell somebody, or because they keep doing the same thing in the same place until somebody figures out the pattern. This wasn't that man. This was a man who'd planned a cipher in advance, who'd designed his own alphabet, mixed it with Greek and astrological symbols, scrambled it through a substitution scheme he'd thought through, who'd timed his letter to arrive when his crime was still in the headlines, who'd written a deadline into it because he wanted leverage and knew how to use leverage. In a later letter, on August 7th, he gave himself a name. "Dear Editor," he wrote, "this is the Zodiac speaking." After that, every letter had the symbol on it, the crosshair, the circle and the cross. I had no idea what it was supposed to mean, but I knew what it was for. It was a brand. September 27th, 1969. A Saturday afternoon, Lake Berryessa. A man-made lake about an hour north of San Francisco, popular with boaters and college kids. 2 students from Pacific Union College, Brian Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Shepard, 22, drove out for a picnic. They walked down to a small island connected to the shore by a sand spit. They lay on a blanket. It was warm. They were alone. Earlier that day, several people had seen a heavy-set man standing in the trees near the lake. A dentist and his son. 3 women on their way to sunbathe. Nobody made anything of it. Around 6:30 p.m., Cecilia Shepard noticed a man watching them from the trees. He stepped out from behind a tree. He was wearing a costume, a black hood that came down over his face, an executioner's hood with clip-on sunglasses fitted to the front of it for him to see through. A bib hanging from his neck, white on black, a symbol stitched onto the bib in the center of his chest, a circle crossed by a line. In his hand, he had a pistol. Hartnell believed it was a .45. He walked over and told them, in a calm voice, that he was an escaped convict, that he'd killed a guard at Deer Lodge Prison in Montana, that he needed their car and their money to get to Mexico. He had brought clothesline, pre-cut. He had Shepard tie up Hartnell. Then he tied up Shepard himself, tightening Hartnell's bonds because he didn't trust her knots. Hartnell, lying on his stomach, still believed they were being robbed. Then the man drew a knife, a long-bladed, wood-handled hunting knife. He stabbed Hartnell 6 times in the back. He stabbed Shepard 10 times, front and back. Then he walked up the path to Hartnell's car. He took a black felt-tip pen from his pocket and wrote on the white passenger door. He wrote 3 dates: December 20th, 1968, July 4th, 1969, Sept 27, 1969, 6:30. Underneath the dates, the words, "by knife." Above all of it, the symbol, the circle, the cross. An hour and 10 minutes later, the killer called the Napa Police Department from a payphone in town, 27 miles from the lake. He said, "I want to report a murder." No, a double murder. He said, "They are 2 miles north of park headquarters." They were in a white Volkswagen Carmen Ghia. He'd noted Hartnell's car. He'd noted the location. He'd given the police directions. Then he said, in the same slow, deliberate voice, "I'm the one that did it." He didn't hang up. He set the receiver down. Cecilia Shepherd died 2 days later. Hartnell survived to describe everything. The costume, the bib, the symbol, the dates. I sat with the photograph of the car door for a long time. Or, sat is the wrong word. The photograph was on a higher shelf, in a folder that the girl out front had pulled down for me earlier and laid on the desk. I'd been staring at it from a foot above it for an hour. I took the pacifier out and set it down next to the photograph. I looked at it like it knew something. This was not a man losing control. This was a man producing a piece of evidence, a man whose hood was sewn for the occasion, a man whose costume had a logo on the chest, a man who thought to bring pre-cut rope and a felt pen, and to write his confession on a car door and then call the police to make sure they found it. This was theatre, and like all theatre, it had been rehearsed. Two weeks later, October 11th, 1969, a Saturday night in San Francisco. A doctoral student in English at San Francisco State, named Paul Stein, 29 years old, had been driving a cab for 3 months to support himself through his thesis. Around 9:45 p.m., he picked up a fare in the Mason and Geary area downtown. The fare asked for the corner of Washington and Maple in Presidio Heights, a quiet, expensive residential neighborhood north of Pacific Heights, half an hour away. The cab arrived at Washington and Maple at about 9:55. The fare asked Stein to drive 1 more block. At Washington and Cherry, the man in the back seat shot Paul Stein once in the head with a 9mm pistol. He took Stein's wallet and his car keys. Then he leaned over the body and tore a piece of bloody fabric from the bottom of Stein's shirt. He took the piece of shirt with him. Across the street, in a second-floor apartment, 3 teenagers, 14, 16, 17, were watching. They saw the killer get out of the cab. They saw him bend over the body. They saw him wipe down the door handle and the dashboard with a piece of cloth. They saw him walk away, north, into the dark of Presidio Heights. They called the police while they watched. A patrol car was nearby. Officers drove toward the scene. As they passed the corner of Jackson and Maple, half a block from the cab, they saw a man walking. They asked him if he'd seen anything. He said yes. He said he'd seen a man with a gun running east on Washington. The officers thanked him. They drove east. The dispatcher had broadcast the suspect description as a black male. The man on Jackson and Maple was white. They did not stop him. I bit down on the pacifier and read the report again. They did not stop him. 2 weeks later, the Zodiac sent a letter to the Chronicle. Inside was a piece of bloody fabric. It matched the missing piece of Paul Stein's shirt. The letter began, "This is the Zodiac speaking. I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington Street and Maple Street last night. To prove this, here is a blood-stained piece of his shirt." In the same letter, he announced he was going to start shooting school buses, picking off the children one by one as they got off. He never did. But for a year, school buses in the Bay Area drove with armed escorts. And for the rest of his time writing, he kept reminding the police of one thing, that he'd been on Jackson Street, half a block from the cab, 15 minutes after he killed Paul Stein. That officers had spoken to him, that they had let him walk away. He thought it was funny. He never let us forget. That was the last confirmed murder. After Stein, the killing stopped. The letters didn't. On November 8, 1969, 4 weeks after the cab driver, the Chronicle received a card. On the back was a cipher. 340 characters, 17 rows of 20. The same kind of mixed alphabet as the first one. Letters, Greek, astrology, made-up symbols. The characters he'd been working with since August. The first cipher had been broken by a high school teacher in a week. This one wasn't going to break. The FBI tried. The Navy tried. The CIA tried. University cryptography departments tried. Amateur codebreakers across the country tried. Within a year of its release, the Z340 was the most attempted unsolved code in the world. 5 years later, sitting at my desk in October of '74, I had a complete photographic copy of it on the blotter in front of me. I'd looked at it more times than I could count. I'd tried frequency analysis. I'd tried the substitution scheme that worked on the first one. I'd tried reading it in columns, in diagonals, backwards. Nothing. It wasn't that the cipher was unbreakable. He didn't have the resources for unbreakable. He was a man with a kitchen table and a pen, like the school teacher who'd broken the first one. He had limits. It was that he'd thought further ahead than we had. The first cipher had been a test. He'd let us solve it because he wanted to see what we could do. And then he'd built the second one to defeat what he'd seen. He'd added a transposition layer. He'd shifted the rows. He'd made the symbols do double duty in places. He'd written a cipher after watching us solve a cipher designed not to be solved. That was the part that bothered me most. Not that he was a killer. Killers were common, that he was learning. I set the pacifier down on top of the cipher. I needed both hands. It rolled off and hit the floor. The girl at the front desk picked it up without saying anything and put it back on the desk and walked back out. I went back to the cipher. He sent 2 more cipher fragments after that. A 13-character string he claimed contained his name. A 32-character string he claimed gave the location of a buried bomb. Both too short to break by any technique we had. That was deliberate. He wasn't sending us puzzles. He was sending us proof. Proof that he could keep secrets in our hands, and we still wouldn't be able to read them. Proof that he was operating at a higher level than the people trying to catch him. Most criminals fear being seen. This man wanted to be seen. He just didn't want to be understood. There's a difference. The first is fear. The second is contempt. And the contempt is what told me, more than anything else, that we were not going to catch him while he was still alive. Not unless he made a mistake we hadn't seen yet. He didn't make mistakes, he made decisions. The case didn't end in October of '74. I kept the file on my desk. I kept it there a long time. The last confirmed letter from the Zodiac arrived at the Chronicle in January of 1974. After that, nothing. The killing had stopped in '69. The writing stopped in '74. Whatever happened to the man who'd done all of this, he stopped. He may have died. He may have been incarcerated for something else. He may have moved away. He may have just decided he was done. Nobody knows. Over the years that followed, the suspect lists grew. The most prominent name was a Vallejo schoolteacher named Arthur Lee Allen. He lived close to the first crime scenes. He'd been near Lake Berryessa on the day of the attack there. A former friend told police that Allen had spoken about wanting to hunt humans for sport, that he'd called it the most dangerous game. Police questioned him. They searched his house. They found nothing that could put him at any of the murders. His fingerprints didn't match. His handwriting was contested. His DNA, tested decades later, didn't match the partial profile from the envelopes. He died in 1992, without ever having been charged. Other suspects came and went. Family members who said they were sure. Old men confessing on their deathbeds. Names that briefly trended and then quietly didn't. None of it stuck. The cipher, the 340, sat unsolved on desks like mine for 51 years. In December of 2020, 3 private citizens, an American software engineer named David Oranchak, an Australian mathematician named Sam Blake, and a Belgian programmer named Jarl van Eyck, broke it. They'd been working on it together for years. Van Eyck had built specialized software. Oranchak had spent the better part of 15 years on it alone. Blake, the mathematician, had figured out the transposition pattern that had defeated everyone else. The decoded message was not what anyone had hoped. It was not his name. It was not the location of a body. It was a taunt. "I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. And I am not afraid of the gas chamber, because it will send me to paradise all the sooner." Paradise, spelled the same way he'd spelled it in 1969, 3 times in the cipher, the way he always spelled it. Whoever the Zodiac was, he'd been telling the same story since the beginning. That he wasn't afraid, that he was going somewhere we couldn't follow, that he didn't think we'd catch him. And then, when we finally read his second cipher 51 years later, the message turned out to be the same thing he'd been saying out loud all along. He hadn't hidden a secret in it. He'd hidden a brag. He'd designed a code that would defeat us for half a century. And the thing he'd encoded behind it was, "I knew I'd defeat you for half a century." That's the kind of mind we'd been chasing. The case is still open. The 2 shorter ciphers, the 13, the 32, have never been solved. They're probably too short to ever be solved with certainty. The fingerprints from the cab are still in the file. The piece of bloody shirt is still in evidence. And whatever the answer is, if there is one, it's been sitting somewhere all this time. In a name nobody asked the right question about. In a handwriting sample nobody compared. In a record that's been on a shelf for 50 years waiting for somebody to pull it down. There are cases that end. There are cases that close. And there are cases that just stop being worked. This was one of those. 6 years I sat with it, then 20, then 40, then more. I never put a name on him, neither did anyone else. He'd built himself into a shape we couldn't fit a name to. The hood, the bib, the symbol, the cipher, the voice on the phone saying goodbye, all of it designed, all of it rehearsed, all of it pointing away from a man and toward an idea. That was the trick. People who think the truth is buried have never met a man who buries it on purpose. I've been told I don't always look the part. I let people keep thinking that. The file closed the way files close. Not clean, just closed. Case closed. End of script.